sat in my car in the freezing parking lot, staring at the red past due stamp on my mother's hospital bill. It was $3,000. My bank account had exactly 84. For 5 years, I had been the backbone of Sterling Logistics. I worked every weekend, skipped every vacation, and fixed every disaster created by my boss, Arthur. He had looked me in the eye just last month and promised me the vice president position. He told me the 6-figure raise was mine. He knew about my mom's heart condition. He knew I was drowning. But today, at the annual Christmas party, he stood on a stage in front of the whole company and shattered my life. He didn't say my name. He announced that his 24-year-old nephew, Bradley, was the new VP. Bradley, a kid who had never held a real job in his life, was now my boss. The room went cold as everyone turned to look at me. I felt the blood drain from my face while Bradley smirked, holding a glass of expensive champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. The injustice felt like a physical weight crushing my lungs. My name is Clara, and I've always believed that hard work was the only way out of poverty. I grew up in a house where we counted every penny, and I carried that drive into my professional life. At Sterling Logistics, I was the first one in and the last one out. I knew every shipping route, every vendor, and every glitch in our software. My coworkers called me the ghost manager because I did all the work while Arthur took all the credit. I didn't mind it back then because I believed the reward was coming. I was the girl who stayed late to make sure the drivers were safe and the cargo was tracked. I was the girl who sacrificed her social life to ensure the company succeeded. I was a professional, a fighter, and a loyal soldier. But as I watched Bradley stumble through his thank you speech, I realized that loyalty meant nothing to men like Arthur. To them, I wasn't a valuable asset. I was just a tool they could use until it wore out, and then toss aside for family. The announcement was just the beginning of the nightmare. After the party ended, Arthur called me into his plush office. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He sat behind his mahogany desk and told me that because I was so good at the technical side, I would be Bradley's mentor. He expected me to teach this kid everything I knew. He wanted me to hand over 5 years of expertise to a boy who couldn't even format a basic spreadsheet. When I mentioned the promise he made about the promotion, Arthur just waved his hand like he was swatting a fly. He told me that business is about family legacy and that I should be grateful to still have a job. He reminded me that my mother's insurance was tied to my employment. It was a threat, plain and simple. He knew he had me trapped, and he enjoyed the power he held over me. I left his office feeling smaller than I ever had, the sting of betrayal burning in my chest. The next morning, the cruelty shifted into high gear. Bradley didn't just take the office, he took my dignity. He showed up 2 hours late and parked his brand new Italian sports car in the reserved for VP spot, the spot that was supposed to be mine. He walked into my cubicle and dropped a stack of papers on my desk. He didn't even say hello. He told me he needed a summary of all our current contracts by lunch because he was meeting a buddy for a long steak dinner. When I pointed out that I had my own work to do, he just laughed. He leaned over my desk and told me that since he was the VP now, his work was my work. He treated me like a personal assistant rather than a senior manager. I looked at the best employee plaque on my wall and felt like a fool. I had built this empire, and now I was being forced to serve the king's incompetent jester. The injustice was a bitter pill I had to swallow every single hour. Christmas week was a blur of exhaustion and silent tears. While the rest of the world was at home with their families, I was in the office fixing Bradley's mistakes. He had managed to delete a $3 million shipping manifest because he thought the delete button was a shortcut for save. I spent 12 hours on the phone with our tech team, missing my mother's Christmas Eve dinner at the nursing home. When I finally called her, she sounded so weak, but she told me she was proud of me. I couldn't tell her I had been passed over. I couldn't tell her that we might lose everything. I sat in my dark cubicle, eating a cold sandwich from a vending machine while Bradley posted photos on social media of himself at a ski resort. He had the nerve to caption it, "Hard work pays off." The rage began to boil under my skin, but I kept it contained. I had to stay. I had to survive. But a small part of me started looking for a way out. What Arthur and Bradley forgot was that I wasn't just a logistics manager. I was a creator. Years ago, before Sterling became a giant, I had developed a proprietary logistics tracking software on my own time. I had used my own money for the patent and the coding. I had allowed Sterling to use it because I thought I was part of the family. The company relied on it for every single move they made. It was the only reason we were more efficient than our competitors. But I had never signed over the rights. I had kept the patent in my own name, waiting for the right moment to negotiate. I had been willing to give it to them for free as part of my VP contract. Now, as I watched Bradley throw a paper airplane at my head from his glass office, I realized I was holding the nuclear codes to their entire operation. They thought I was a helpless victim. They had no idea I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom. The week between Christmas and New Year's was the quietest time in the office, but the loudest in my head. Bradley was back from his ski trip, bragged about his signing bonus constantly. He told everyone in the break room that he was planning to buy a beach house by the summer. I stood by the coffee machine, my hands shaking as I listened to him. He looked at me and asked if I could grab him a latte because the intern was out sick. I looked him dead in the eye and said no. He seemed shocked, his face turning a bright, angry red. He told me he would be reporting my insubordination to Arthur. I didn't care anymore. The plan was already in motion. Every night, I stayed up late at my kitchen table, working on the legal paperwork to revoke the license for my software. I was tired of being the ghost. I was ready to become the storm. I just needed one more night of their cruelty to push me over the edge. That night came on December 30th. Arthur called me into his office for a performance review. I thought he might finally apologize or offer me a small bonus to make things right. Instead, he told me that Bradley had complained about my attitude. He told me that if I didn't start showing more respect to the leadership team, he would withhold my year-end bonus and cancel my insurance coverage effective January 1st. He sat there, smirking, knowing he was holding my mother's life over my head. He called me replaceable. He told me that there were 1,000 girls like me who would kill for my job. I realized then that there was no loyalty left to save. I wasn't leaving a job. I was escaping a prison. I looked at him and simply nodded. I didn't say a word. I walked out of his office, went to my desk, and packed my personal belongings into a small box. I left my key card on the desk and walked out into the cold night air. New Year's Eve was a day of pure, calculated silence. Arthur and Bradley were at the city's biggest gala, celebrating the official signing of Bradley's VP contract. They were surrounded by investors and city leaders, showing off their legacy. Meanwhile, I was at home with my laptop. At exactly 11:59 p.m., as the world began to count down to the new year, I hit send on an email. It wasn't just a resignation letter. It was a formal legal notice. I revoked Sterling Logistics' right to use my patented software effective immediately. I also sent a cease and desist order to their board of directors. Without that software, their entire tracking system would go dark. Their trucks would stop, their clients would lose their cargo, and their upcoming merger would fall apart. I hit the button and felt a surge of electricity go through my body. The clock struck midnight, and for the first time in 5 years, I was truly free. I hugged my mother and told her that things were going to change. January 1st was the most peaceful day of my life. I turned off my phone and spent the day reading and cooking a real meal. I knew what was happening at the office. I knew the servers were crashing. I knew the trucks were idling at the gates because the digital manifests wouldn't load. I knew Arthur was probably screaming at his IT team, who would tell him that the license had expired. I felt no guilt. I had given them 5 years of my soul, and they had tried to crush me. I had played by the rules until they broke them. Now I was playing by my own. I had already registered my own consulting firm, Aegis Systems, weeks ago. I wasn't just a girl who got fired. I was a business owner who owned the most valuable asset in the industry. I sat on my porch, watching the snow fall, knowing that the phone would start ringing the moment the business world woke up the next morning. On the morning of January 2nd, I woke up early. I put on my best suit and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I turned on my phone, and it immediately began to explode with notifications. 42 missed calls from Arthur, 17 from Bradley, dozens from the board members I had worked with over the years. I didn't answer any of them. I opened my laptop and checked my email. There it was, the first official email Bradley had ever sent as the vice president of Sterling Logistics. It wasn't a professional memo or a greeting to the staff. It was a panicked, misspelled message sent directly to my personal email address. He didn't even use a professional tone. He wrote, "Clara, the system is broken. Fix it now. This isn't funny. Arthur is losing his mind and the merger people are here. Log back in and fix the glitch." I laughed so hard my eyes watered. He still thought he was my boss. He still thought I was his servant. I didn't reply to Bradley's email for 3 hours. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted Arthur to feel the walls closing in. I knew that every hour the system was down cost them tens of thousands of dollars in late fees and lost contracts. Finally, I typed out a short, professional response. I told him that I was no longer an employee of Sterling Logistics and that I had no obligation to fix anything. I reminded him that the software belonged to me personally and that their unauthorized use of it over the last 12 hours had already incurred massive legal penalties. I told him that if he wanted to speak with me, he could send a formal acquisition offer to my firm, Aegis Systems. I hit send and watched the little delivered icon pop up. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Arthur. This time, I picked up. His voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation. He called me a traitor. I told him he was the one who taught me that business was about legacy, and I was starting mine. The next email from Bradley came an hour later. It was a formal acquisition offer, but it was insulting. He offered to buy my company and my patent for $50,000. He wrote that I should take it because this is more money than you'll ever see anyway, and that Arthur was willing to be generous despite my betrayal. They still didn't get it. They thought I was desperate for their crumbs. They thought they could still bully me into submission. I didn't even dignify the offer with a counterproposal. I simply replied, "Offer rejected. Please do not contact me again unless you are prepared to discuss real market value. Every hour you wait, the price goes up." I knew that their merger was scheduled for the end of the week. If they didn't have a working system, the other company would walk away and Sterling would go bankrupt. I was holding all the cards, and for the first time, I was the one making the rules. By the afternoon of January 3rd, the tone changed completely. The board of directors had clearly stepped in and taken the phone away from Bradley. I received a very polite, very terrified email from the chairman of the board. He asked for an emergency meeting at a neutral location. He said they were willing to discuss significant compensation. I agreed to meet them the next morning at a quiet cafe downtown. That night, I sat with my mother and told her that we were going to be okay. I told her that she would never have to worry about a medical bill again. She looked at me with so much pride, but also a little bit of fear. She knew how dangerous men like Arthur could be. I told her not to worry. I had spent 5 years learning every secret of that company. I knew exactly where the bodies were buried, and I knew exactly how much they were willing to pay to keep their empire from crumbling. The meeting was a sight to behold. Arthur was there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled and his hands were shaking. Bradley was there too, sitting in the corner looking small and confused. The chairman of the board sat in the middle. He pushed a folder across the table toward me. Inside was a new offer, $500,000 for the patent and a consulting fee to get the system back online. I didn't even pick up the folder. I looked Arthur straight in the eye. I told him that the price was now $2 million, plus a fully funded medical trust for my mother. Arthur slammed his hand on the table and called me a thief. I didn't flinch. I told him that he had stolen my promotion, my Christmas, and my dignity. I told him that $2 million was a bargain compared to the $50 million he was about to lose when the merger failed. The chairman told Arthur to be quiet. They were starting to realize I wasn't the same girl they had bullied. I stood up to leave, telling them they had until 5 o'clock to sign the papers or the price would double again. Bradley tried to say something, but Arthur finally snapped and told him to shut up. It was the first time I had ever seen Arthur show his nephew anything but favoritism. The pressure was breaking them. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't doing this for revenge, though revenge felt sweet. I was doing this for justice. I was doing this because I deserved to be paid for the value I brought to the world. I spent the afternoon at the park, watching people skate on the frozen pond. For the first time in my life, I wasn't checking my work email. I wasn't worrying about a boss's temper. I was just Clara, a woman who had finally realized her own worth. At 4:55 p.m., my lawyer called. Sterling Logistics had agreed to all my terms. The signing happened the next morning. I walked into the Sterling office one last time, not as an employee, but as a contractor. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Employees were whispering as I walked past my old cubicle. I saw Bradley sitting at his desk, staring at a blank screen. He looked like a child who had lost his favorite toy. I went into the boardroom, signed the documents, and watched as the $2 million wire transfer hit my account. I then spent 2 hours fixing the glitch, which was really just me reactivating the license I had deactivated. The systems roared back to life, and the office erupted in cheers. Arthur tried to shake my hand, but I ignored it. I told him that my consulting work was done and that any future issues would be billed at $5,000 an hour. I walked out of the building with my head held high, knowing I would never have to set foot in that toxic place again. The fallout began almost immediately. Without me there to fix his daily mistakes, Bradley was a disaster. He managed to offend 3 of their biggest clients in the first week. The board of directors, who were now watching him like hawks, realized that he was completely incompetent. The merger went through, but the new company had a restructuring clause. They started looking at the books and realized that Arthur had been inflating Bradley's numbers to make him look good. The injustice was finally being brought into the light. I heard from my old friends at the office that Arthur was under investigation for corporate nepotism. I sat in my new home office, working on my next project for Aegis Systems, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. I had my own company now, and I was hearing 3 of my old coworkers who had been treated poorly by Arthur. We were building something real, based on merit, not family names. 1 month later, I received a final email from Bradley. It wasn't an order or a bribe. It was a desperate plea for a job. He had been fired from Sterling after the new owners realized he couldn't even perform basic data entry. Arthur had been forced into early retirement and was facing a massive lawsuit from the board. Bradley wrote that he learned his lesson and that he always admired my work ethic. I didn't even feel angry anymore. I felt pity. He had been given everything on a silver platter and had managed to break the platter. I didn't reply. I simply deleted the email and went back to work. My mother was doing much better, her medical bills paid in full, and she was resting in a beautiful private room at the best facility in the state. The new year had started with a tragedy, but it was ending with a triumph. I had turned their cruelty into my fuel, and in the end, the ghost had become the master of her own destiny. The story of my betrayal became a legend in the industry. Other companies started reaching out to Aegis Systems, asking for my software and my expertise. I was no longer the girl counting pennies in a frozen parking lot. I was a CEO. I made sure that every person who worked for me was treated with respect. I offered the best benefits and the highest salaries because I knew what it felt like to be on the other side. Arthur and Bradley had tried to use my poverty against me, but they only succeeded in teaching me how to be a better leader than they ever were. On the anniversary of the Christmas party, I took my team out for a lavish dinner. We didn't toast to legacy or family names. We toasted to hard work, integrity, and the power of knowing your worth. I looked at the city's skyline and realized that the best revenge isn't a loud fight, it's a life well lived. I eventually heard that Arthur had lost his mansion and was living in a small apartment, the same kind of place he used to mock me for living in. Bradley was working as a junior clerk at a firm where nobody knew his uncle. The cycle of injustice had finally been broken. I had taken the power back, and I had used it to build a future for myself and my mother. I learned that you should never let a boss convince you that you are replaceable. You are the only one who can decide what you are worth. As I sat in my office on a quiet New Year's Eve, 1 year later, I looked at the yellow paper cranes sitting on my desk. It was a reminder of the night I decided to stop being a ghost and start being a legend. The fire was still in me, but now it was a steady, warm flame that lighted the way for others. I was Clara, and I had finally won. Looking back, the moment Bradley's paper airplane hit my coffee was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the spark that woke me up. If Arthur had given me that promotion, I might still be there, working my life away for a man who didn't respect me. I would have been comfortable, but I wouldn't have been free. Their cruelty was the key to my cage. I realized that sometimes the world has to be unfair to push you into the place where you truly belong. I was no longer afraid of the red, past due stamps or the cold stares of powerful men. I had built my own power from the ground up. I stood by the window of my own firm, watching the snow fall over the city, and I smiled. The little girl who grew up counting pennies was gone. In her place was a woman who knew that the only legacy worth having is the one you build with your own 2 hands. The final blow to Arthur's ego came when my company, Aegis Systems, was asked to consult for the very firm that had merged with Sterling. They wanted me to evaluate the leadership team. I had to walk back into those same halls, but this time, I held the power of life and death over their careers. I saw Arthur in the hallway, looking like a ghost of the man he once was. He tried to hide, but I walked right up to him and handed him my business card. I told him that if he ever needed a job as a junior clerk, he could apply at my firm. The look on his face was the ultimate emotional payoff. He was humiliated, defeated, and entirely at my mercy. I didn't hire him, of course. I just wanted him to know that the replaceable girl was now the one holding the pen. The downfall was complete, and it was more satisfying than any amount of money. Bradley's rise and fall was just as poetic. I saw him at a local coffee shop a few months later. He was wearing a cheap suit and looking stressed as he tried to prepare for an interview. He recognized me and started to apologize, but I held up my hand. I told him that I didn't need his apology. I needed him to understand that the world doesn't owe him anything just because of his last name. I told him that until he learned how to work as hard as the people he used to look down on, he would always be a failure. He looked like he wanted to cry. I walked out and got into my car, feeling a sense of closure that I had never expected. The boy who thought he could steal my life was now just a stranger in a coffee shop, and I was the one driving away into a bright, successful future. Today, my mother is healthy, my company is thriving, and I am finally happy. I learned that the most important acquisition isn't a company or a patent, it's your own self-respect. I stopped waiting for Arthur to give me a promotion and I gave myself a career. I stopped waiting for the world to be fair and I made it fair for myself. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are being overlooked or mistreated, remember my story. You are not a ghost. You are not a tool. You are the owner of your own life. Don't be afraid to revoke the license on your soul and walk away. There is a whole world out there waiting for someone with your heart and your drive. The new year is coming, and it's time for you to take back your power. I did it, and so can you. My name is Clara, and this was the year I finally found my voice.